This is amazing. Most things are when we get together as a family, huh? Equity is an amazing family. So, hello again. Now, as I was saying 25 years ago, it really is a great pleasure. And don't expect any kind of highfalutin jumping around or any kind of explosive actions from me tonight, because I've been wandering around through the place and I have met so many of my old friends, so many who were here with us at the beginning in 1976. And it really has a great feeling for me of just getting together and sharing stories as we do in the pub after a show. Or the way you guys sort of whisked down that food and crashed around here with the drinks in your hands. I thought we were having a party after a tour date. Equity actually celebrates 61 years of existence in Canada, because before we separated from the American Union, we were under the umbrella of American Actors' Equity. But in the early 70s, the Canadian Executive Committee, or CEC, the committee that governs Canadian activities, proposed a series of cross-country, face-to-face meetings to determine our members' views on the future direction of their organization. And it was a committee of the CEC, of which I was chair at the time, that said, we want to go across the country and we want to ask our members in their workplace what they want their equity to be in the future. Where are we going? What's the direction? What do the members want? Because it's the members that drive equity, not your council, not individuals. It's the members who make the decision, proposed by council or individuals perhaps. And I think we have always in equity followed that. It's a mark of pride. It's a mark of pride that I've always felt, that I belong to an organization that actually listens to what the members want and then actually goes out and gets it done. And Equity has done that far better than any other organization I know. So as chair of that committee, I spent a full year traveling across the country and talking to members in their workplaces, the theaters. Then we brought back, after this extensive investigation, the feedback, which was presented to the CEC, the Executive Council, and it contained 20 recommendations that became milestones in the evolution of equity in Canada, and indeed of theatre in Canada. Recommendations included creating a single universal theatre contract, the Canadian Theatre Agreement, CTA, to replace a plethora of oft conflicting rule books written and designed for American needs. We wanted to Canadianize our theatres by introducing a non-member, non-resident policy to stem the unnecessary import of foreign talent. A strong campaign for the production of Indigenous works in our regional theatres, and most significant of all, a recommendation to separate ourselves from our parent union, American Actors' Equity Association, AEA, based in New York, of which we'd been a part since the mid-1950s. Although we had a good relationship with the AEA, we knew that we wanted to be separate, that we wanted to be our own people, and with our own culture, and we wanted full independence. We wanted to establish our own union. The Americans rather poo-pooed this idea. And the situation came to a head in Stockholm, Sweden, during a FIA, International Federation of Actors, conference. I've always been talking, I always harangued everyone who is within earshot about history and about the history of this organization. I consider it extremely important. And I consider it important that not only is it not lost, but that we are all aware of it all the time, inequity, when we proceed with whatever we want to do to change the world. And we have actually changed the world in lots of ways by our work in equity. So history is important because you all know the quote from George Santayana that those who cannot remember their past are condemned to repeat it. But mind you, he also said that history is a pack of lies about events that never happened, told by people who weren't there. So I guess you have a choice which one of the versions that you're going to keep. One of the advantages of living a long time is that you have a chance to disagree with your old political companions or foes without having to deal with their rebuttal. Case in point, Vern Chapman, the late Vern Chapman, dear Vern, who was instrumental from the very beginning of equity in Canada, wrote an article for the 25th Anniversary magazine. And in it, he said, and I quote, "At the FIA Executive Committee meetings, each country has only one vote, which led to an embarrassing situation at a meeting in Stockholm. The president of Equity, Theo Bickel, the late Theo Bickel, rightly claimed he spoke for all equity, including the Canadian members, which left the chairperson of the Canadian Executive Committee, Dan Mcdonald, in an embarrassing position. If his fellow Canadians at the meeting wished to vote against an American motion, and if Dan agreed with them, then he could not side with them and vote against his own president. In a conversation with Dan after the meeting, Theo recognized the absurdity of the situation and proposed for the first time that perhaps the moment had come for the separation of the two memberships with a reciprocal agreement between them. So, the first tangible suggestion for separation actually came from American president of Equity." End quote. Well, this is not true. The members of Equity, in fact, had already decided before I went to Stockholm that separation was in our future. This is the real story. I arrived for the first day of the meetings, and it was the desks, chairs and desks were set up alphabetically. So there was up in the front, there was so-and-so and so-and-so, the Canada, and then behind Canada was the Union des Artistes and ACTRA. And then way further back, it said USA and USSR. And I was seated behind the plaque that said USA. So I refused. I said, "No, I'm not an American." And they said, "No, you're a member of American Equity." I said, "I don't represent Americans. And I'm not going to sit here as a Canadian pretending that I'm speaking for Americans, because I don't want to, and I will not. So I will not take this seat." So all hell broke loose, obviously. And they finally, after some delay, with everyone standing around saying, when do we get to sit down and start talking? And they finally came with a little cardboard sign that said Canada, that somebody had badly initialed, and they put that between USA and USSR. And I said, how wonderful that not only geographically, but politically, we're in the right space. And there was the USA on our right, of course, and the USSR on our left. And Mikhail Pashkov, who was the leader of the president of the Russian Performers Union, which had something like over 1 million members, half of them who actually literally swept the streets in Moscow, but were considered members of the Actors Union. He got a great kick out of this, thought it was great fun. And we struck up a good friendship, which stood us in good stead later on during various talks when things got a little bit dicey and we needed some assistance. Russia would stand behind Canada and say, oh, Canada's right. So that's what happened. And that was only the beginning, because the Americans were beside themselves, to say the least. Now, Theo Bickel was not there because he said he was supposed to arrive 2 days later. And the executive director said, well, you know, he was upset by it, and he thought Theo would be as well. And I said, too bad. And I said, Theo was due in 2 days' time. He said, yes. So I said, well, we'll have a talk about it. The next day in the hotel, who arrives but Theo Bickel. And he made a great display of greeting me in the lobby of the hotel. Oh, Dansky, he said, and he came to a great bear hug, and, oh, good to see you, my dear colleague. And that's a little strange. And anyway, we said hello and had lunch, whatever it was, and went back. And that evening, there was a meeting of the English-speaking unions of FIA. And we, of course, were there. I went to the meeting, and it was being chaired, by the way, by Paul Siren, who was the executive director of ACTRA at the time. And at one point in the meeting, Paul turned to me and said, Dan, what do the members of Equity in Canada think about this? And Theo interrupted and said, just a moment, I speak for Canadian Actors Equity here. He said, Canada does not have a voice here. Dan does not have a voice. He's a member of American Equity. Everyone was a bit dismayed by this. I was, being of Scottish descent, a little bit angry. And I waited until the meeting was over, a short time later, and I got up from this meeting room, I went over to the door, and I blocked people from getting out. And Theo came to get out, and I said, don't you ever dare do anything like that again. How dare you speak of Canadians like that? You have insulted our members, and you've insulted the country, and you've insulted my culture. And he said, I'm only saying what is legal. I am the president of America. I said, I don't give a good flying fiddler's fart, I think I said. I said, you don't do that again or you'll be sorry. And it was kind of left at that. He was embarrassed. If everybody in the room couldn't get out, and they were embarrassed, you know. But some of them smiled at me as they left. But anyway, the next day, I get a call from the executive director, or at least Bernard Chadwick did, who was our executive director at the time. And Bernard said, They want us to have a meeting. They expect you to apologize to Theo Bickel. That wasn't on. I said, no, there's no way I'm going to do that. I said, he insulted Canadians. And I said, he said, well, but he thinks you shouldn't apologize because you were insulting to the president of the American Actors Equity. And I said, well, tough, so-and-so. Next, we had an invitation to, there was a lovely little theater outside, a Rococo theater, pristine as a museum. And we were over to viewing that, having a tour on a half day off. And the American executive director came over and asked if we would take a little walk in the woods. And I just thought of it. Maybe I should have checked for firearms before we went, but I didn't. We didn't look at that kind of thing in those days. But anyway, we went for a walk, and I found myself walking beside Theo, and the two executive guys were in the back. And we walked for quite a while, and the two executive directors were chatting back and forth, and nothing was said between Theo and myself. He was waiting for my apology. We could have walked a very long time. He was not going to get it. And then finally he said, I think, it's unfortunate that what was said yesterday. I said, yes, it was. And he said, he asked me for an apology. I said, none is coming. I said, I will not apologize. I said, I represent Canadians. You do not, and you do not speak for them. I do. And he said, well, maybe we should have more discussion about this. I said, absolutely. We're way ahead of you on this. We have already decided that we're going to separate. And he was quite taken aback, and he said, oh, well, maybe we should discuss things, Now, I said, yes, of course we would. But I knew that they desperately wanted the Canadian market, the Americans. They had Broadway shows that were making a great deal of money in this country. And they would come out of Broadway and they'd tour around Canada to Montreal, to Toronto, to Vancouver. And they wanted to ensure that they would be able to maintain that. So they were prepared to give practically anything. I knew that, so we could get whatever we wanted. And after that walk in the woods, there came a walk around several desks in New York and Toronto. And finally, we got ourselves together to write an amicable separation agreement. It was signed on the 1st of April, April Fool's Day. It was appropriate that it was signed on that date and in that year because the Americans, of course, were celebrating the 200th anniversary of their separation. And I thought it was, and I used the argument, that it was quite appropriate that during their anniversary of the separation that we should have a separation. So, and things were looking pretty good. We actually got together and had a good time. And a few days later, we had this wonderful, wonderful celebration of theater in the St. Lawrence Hall, where we had a number of our top stars in ballet, opera, and in the theater, of course. And I remember Theo saying to me, I didn't realize there was so much talent in Canada. And of course, he never looked. But he came around to supporting the idea because it was money for the Americans. And for us, it was never about money. It was about pride, and it was about our culture. So, where do I go from here, Dan? I came, I'm living in Nova Scotia now. Yeah. Down on the South Shore yet. And I get up, I can look at the ocean every day and watch the seagulls crap all over my roof. And until the Nova Scotia government suddenly destroyed the film industry last April, we were doing very well. Now, we still have theater in Nova Scotia, but there's no film industry. So things are a little bit tough down there. I'll have to spend more time watching the birds flying around, I guess, and the mallards landing in the ocean and all peeing together, trying to warm the water up.